Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner. And I was wanting to return to talking about some of the issues pertaining to the recent flap, I suppose you would say. Erdogan from Turkey, the president of Turkey's bodyguards, actually, assaulting Americans or at least people protesting in America. Uh, that does bother me quite a bit, and I think that there should be more said on this. Uh, the date right now is the 21st of May, and this is the wee hours of the morning. My favorite time of the day, those madman hours. And one of the things that I wanted to start with is a little bit from Bombard's body language. She's one of my favorite YouTube people. I just love her work and what she's done. And I have it almost queued up. It's not exactly queued. But I'll try to splice this in so that you can both see and hear what she's talking about. Here, let me.
Checkmate. Erdogan. He had some mannerisms in here that reminded me of when Obama was grooming him and had him shoot down the Russian planes.
It is a great pleasure to welcome President Erdogan for his first visit to the White House in years. The American and Turkish peoples have been friends and allies for many, many decades. Turkey was a pillar in the Cold War against communism.
He's got a submissive posture, Erdogan does, and Trump is being polite. I'm not going to go too much into this because this is such a unstable region and an unstable relationship. But we will talk a little bit about it.
Şahsım milletim adına şükranlarımı ifade ediyorum.
And I would like to take this August opportunity to thank President Trump and his team for the generous hospitality they have shown us upon arrival, not only to my personal self, but to the entire members of my delegation on behalf of the entire Turkish nation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Bir kez daha
And gives him, yes, that look of, I'm talking to you. This is for you. The appreciation is definitely towards you. Erdogan has some issues that I see, but he is the leader of a country, regardless if some people think that he stole it or he's not letting go of it. And you have to respect him as such. And I have faith that through the trade that Trump talked about in this conversation, that Turkey can be helped along and seeing things in a way that stops the bloodshed. But please understand that this is a volatile situation and that some things just shouldn't be said. If you'd like to leave a like, if you like the content, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I think she's brilliant. And as I say, I'm going to try to splice this into the video. If I don't succeed, let it be said that Erdogan is submissive. You can see it on his face. And the flowery words that he uses, this is pretty common in Turkish diplomatic speaking. It's just the way they do things. But at the same time, the dominance in the picture is clearly that of our president. That Erdogan has been called to the carpet in some way. And you can see that on the looks on both of them. Now, that said, okay, one of the main things to keep in mind, of course, is that Turkey is in its region, it's a fairly strong power. They can challenge Russia. But they probably wouldn't defeat them, but they could give them a good run if it comes out to all-out war between the two. Turkey has the largest army in NATO and in the region. They're kind of a heavyweight in a small place. The only one that I think that would give them a real fight to speak of actually would be Israel. And that I think is something that Erdogan is spoiling for, actually, and that we might see it yet. Now, I picked up a few articles to which I'll put links to, and I want to go over some of these things with in light of all the issues here. And the first one I'm going to go over is from Deutsche Welle, and it is from the 17th, a couple days ago, and it was pretty much right after the fight. It's by Alistair Walsh. He's a writer with AP and Reuters and AFP. But this is in Deutsche Welle, which is the German news service, actually. And the title is U.S. condemns Erdogan bodyguard attack on Kurdish protesters. Now let's get this straight. It wasn't just Kurdish protesters. It was also Turkish and also Armenian. So there were basically three main groups that were there, and that they were speaking in Turkish, from what I understand, in the protest. All right, so here we go. The Turkish president's bodyguard violently attacked a group of pro-Kurdish demonstrators after a meeting with Donald Trump. The city of Washington, D.C., the U.S. State Department, and police all condemned the attack. The city of Washington on Wednesday condemned a brutal attack on peaceful protesters, quote unquote, by Recep Tayyip Erdogan's bodyguards. The bodyguards allegedly pushed past Washington police to attack supporters of a Kurdish group as Erdogan returned to the Turkish embassy following a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington. Videos posted to social media showed a group of men in suits punching and kicking protesters, including a woman lying down, while police struggled to stop the violence. Yesterday afternoon, we witnessed what appeared to be a brutal attack on peaceful protesters outside the Turkish ambassador's residence, a police spokesman said. The actions seen outside of the Turkish embassy in Washington, D.C. stand in contrast to the First Amendment rights and principles we tirelessly protect every single day, a policeman said. The U.S. State Department expressed concern to Turkey in the strongest possible terms on Wednesday. Violence is never an appropriate response to free speech, and we support the rights of people everywhere to free expression and peaceful protest, State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said. This is the United States of America. We do not do this here, Senator John McCain said on Twitter. There is no excuse for this kind of thuggish behavior. Police said 11 people were injured in the clashes. The meeting came after the U.S. Announced the plan to arm a Kurdish militia to help fight the so-called Islamic State. This would be the a YPG, I think, was the name of the group, and they are a Syrian Kurdish group, and the Turkish government maintains that they are connected directly to the PKK. They claim to not be. There's I think the jury's kind of out on the truth of the matter, though. I'd have to examine a little deeper. Although I tend to think that the PKK does try to extend its reach to all Kurdish groups, but I don't think they've quite dominated them. I know for a fact in northern Iraq they weren't able to establish control over that government there, the regional government. Okay, back to the article. Turkish official Anadolu news agency, which is really the propaganda wing of the AKP, the ruling party of Turkey and Erdogan. The Anadolu news agency labeled the protesters Kurdish supporters of terror. That's a quote. Saying that they chanted anti-Erdogan slogans as Erdogan entered the embassy. It said his security team acted to disperse the protesters because, quote, police did not pay heed to Turkish demands to intervene, unquote. Police said 2 men had been arrested and they were pursuing charges against others involved, but diplomatic immunity could hinder those efforts. Police Chief Peter Newsom said at a news conference Wednesday, he said the police were examining video to identify those responsible. Erdogan used his White House meeting to tell Trump that his country would not accept Syrian Kurdish fighters in the region, but did not directly criticize the U.S. decision to arm them. I didn't really have much choice, actually. Trump said Erdogan was an important ally in the fight against terrorism and did not mention Erdogan's domestic crackdown after last year's failed coup attempt. We've had a great relationship and we'll make it even better, Trump said in his joint appearance. Tensions had arisen between the two countries over Washington's decision to arm the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia that Ankara regards as an extension of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, in Turkish, by the way. Or actually, Kurdish, I'm sorry. Last year, Erdogan's bodyguard attacked a group outside of the Brookings Institution, ejecting a Turkish reporter from the speech venue, kicking another, and throwing a third to the ground outside the prominent think tank. Ambereen Zaman, the Economist, former Turkey correspondent and scholar at the Wilson Center, a D.C. think tank, reported at the time that the bodyguards called her a PKK whore, a reference to the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party. Okay, so this isn't the first time he's done this in America, by the way. Typically, with Obama in power, it was covered over. Well, I remember it happening. It's just one of those things. He does it everywhere he goes. It's been made more of a thing this time around, but, I think that not only was Obama given a pretty much a free pass, but so was Erdogan. And he really didn't deserve it. The only reason he was given that free pass was because Obama called him his good friend. Well, that's kind of blowback. Erdogan tried to get us involved in Syria a long time ago. And I, to this day, say that I think that Obama's decision not to get involved was the best move that he made. The way he tried and almost succeeded in getting us involved much earlier in Syria was regarding the gas attack in 2013, I think it was. And this was the so-called red line issue. And it was Erdogan who, I believe, in fact, there is very strong evidence that he did manipulate it through the MIT and ISIS and al-Nusra. And actually, al-Nusra was the one that was supposed to have actually triggered the attack. And that seems to be the way of it. But the perception, and keep in mind, perception is everything in politics. That's why nobody's talking about when Obama had this happen in the U.S. Last year at the Brookings Institute. Nobody's going to talk about that. Why? Because they don't remember. See, there's a reason I called my program American Amnesia. This is why. This is exactly why. It's the manipulation of the mainstream media. And the complicity of the people, because it makes it easier just to go to sleep. Not remember. We don't like history, remember? Well, I do. I like history a lot. I find it fascinating. And in that whole panoply of history, there's all these little places where it's been kind of marked over and buried over. And they say, that history is written by the winners. It's really not. The losers also have input. And so does the rest of the world that they're witnessing the whole thing. It's kind of a combination of things. And the dominant impression might be that of the winners, but at the same time, there are undertones from the losers. And there are things that are just kind of animalities that sit there and they just wait for people to pull them out. Just like the records of the slavery that occurred in Spain or Spanish America during the time of Columbus and thereafter. These kinds of things aren't like in the forefront, but they're there. That doesn't disappear. We can determine a lot of things about the daily life of regular people whose stories are never told. So when they say that history is written by the winners, they're not entirely telling the truth. Matter of fact, there's a lot of people that are using that to their benefit to spread their own narrative and to revise the narrative in a way that they find easy to manipulate the people by. And we've seen that. So keep in mind, history is a whole lot more interesting than a bunch of dates and just a bunch of people killing other people. It's a whole lot more interesting. And you see continuity. You see how things come back again, too. And that's why it is important to know history. But people don't seem to learn from history, and that's why they keep getting burned by it. Anyway, let's go on to the next one here that I have in mind. The second one here I have is an article by a Turkish writer in Hurriyet Daily News, and these three others are from Hurriyet Daily News, and they're opinion pieces, but they contain news and you see something of the attitude of people that aren't necessarily in favor of Erdogan, but they're also people that have had to be very careful of what they say about Erdogan so they don't get stuck in prison. So keep those facts in mind, because they are pertinent to what is written here, and I'll explain some other things that I know that I can add to, and just elucidate a little bit more. The first one here is by Barcin Yananch. She's a writer on foreign affairs, actually, usually. And this is Erdogan-Trump agenda limited to just 3 issues. Okay, and it starts. Abdullah, we seem to have the same agenda, said Kandi. Former Turkish President Abdullah Gül was former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice's interlocutor. At the time, he was serving as the foreign minister of a mid-sized power, while she was the foreign minister of a superpower. And we remember Condi Rice. Rice's observation showed the diversity of issues on the agenda and the level of cooperation between Ankara and Washington at that time. This should kind of tell you something. The AKP, the party that Mr. Erdogan has been one of the key members of. He was the leader of the party, even as Abdullah Gül was their foreign minister. And at the time, I forget who was the president. But it was one of his minions. They were holding the place until he could move into it later on. Actually, they held on to it so that he could move Gül into place. Gül had problems with the public at first, but he became more and more of a basically a sympathetic of the Republic. And before he was done, actually, I think he had done a fine job. Matter of fact, a wonderfully good job. And he represented possibly one of the few people that could have given a challenge to Erdogan. But I think Erdogan would have murdered him. And he very wisely stepped aside and said, no. He is probably a person within the government who maintains kind of a secondary role as possibly looking out for what might come after Erdogan crashes and burns. But right now, he would be. You would not be able to get him to move against Erdogan. It would not happen. There are people within the AKP that are probably in similar positions. I'd say Shimshek, who was one of the deputy prime ministers, would be another. But I don't see any of them moving against him. The only one that gets named would be Fethullah Gulen, and really that's only because of his being in exile. There are other things, but I don't have time to go into them. At any rate, Rice's observation showed the diversity of issues on the agenda and the level of cooperation between Ankara and Washington at the time. The U.S.-Turkish agenda was rather limited during the Cold War. If you set aside bilateral economic issues, which were also limited in scope and largely tied to political issues in terms of military purchases, Turkey's main preoccupations were limited to seeking U.S. support, or at least maintaining a balanced stance on problems with Greece or on the Cyprus issue. And Greece and Turkey right now are in really bad terms. Things could really go south really quick on that, and it could pull apart NATO. Just so you know. Rather than a macro issue on NATO's general strategy, for example, Turkey would focus on a micro agenda seeking to talk about its specific concerns in the alliance. The diversity came after the end of the Cold War. The war in Iraq, the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, turbulence in the Balkans and the Caucasus, following the collapse of communism and the demise of the Soviet Union, Turkey found itself at the epicenter of everything important that was going on in the world in the 1990s. No longer just a buffer state, but in close proximity to major regional changes and transformations, Turkey aspired to play a role in the Turkic world, spreading from the Adriatic to the Great Wall of China amid claims that the 21st century will be the Turkish century. There are many Turkic peoples. The Tatars in Russia. You have the Gogals in Romania. You have the Azeris in Iran and also in Azerbaijan. You have people such as the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz and all those. The little stand countries, all through Russia, or what used to be Russia, or the Soviet Union. And you have also Tajiks and stuff like that who are up in Afghanistan. There's other tribes up that way, and also the Turkomen in Iraq, which are one of the more minor ethnicities, but they are pushed in with the Assyrian Christians. And the Kurds in the north, they are part of that area. They're regional. And you also have some scattered through India and Pakistan and all through the area there. And then into an area in western China called Xinjiang. And that's there's several small groups there, but the main one is the Uyghurs. Which are the main ethnicity of the western part of China, and they are separatists, and through the machinations of international politics, they ended up being friends with Al Qaeda, and now they're dealing with ISIS a little bit. It's very sad, very sad. Turkish governments, or I should say Turkic here, Turkic governments soon realized they did not have the capacity to fulfill these aspirations. So they fell short. There's still a big movement within Turkey to maintain that, and it actually involves the MHP, the MHP, which is the Kemalist nationalists, and that includes the Grey Wolves and their ilk, and also the AKP, who is ruling the country. They're a conservative Islamist party, and that they that there is some overlap in the vision of the two parties. So that has actually led to the alliance that has finally permitted or gotten Erdogan his dream of becoming the sole ruler of Turkey. It was the MHP and their allies that crossed over to vote. Evet, yes. Higher is no, by the way. But Evet, they voted Evet, and so now Erdogan is consolidating his power. He's getting rid of parliament, and he's going to move the power of the prime ministerial office into the presidential office, and making the two into one. There you go. Although the prime minister is still in place at this point, that will change. That's pretty much guaranteed. Okay, so the Turkic governments soon realized that they did not have the capacity to fulfill these aspirations. So the Pan-Turkish thing is on hold, but it's still in place. There's still, at least Erdogan is looking towards that. This Pan-Turkic thing it really goes back to the beginning of the Turkish Republic, and this was the movement by Pasha. Oh, what was his name? He was the head of the Young Turks, and when he lost out to Ataturk, he went east to fight for the reunification of the Turkic people. At any rate, with the war in Iraq, the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, turbulence in the Balkans, and I'm sorry. Let's start down here. Nevertheless, Turkey's geostrategic position and even its limited ability to play a role made it an indispensable interlocutor. It means that they almost like a translator, that they're between two poles, okay, and so that's really a lot of the way Turkey's been viewed by our government over the years as being standing between Europe and the Middle East, being talking between Christian and secular Europe to the Muslim Middle East as well. You know, I mean, the religious role cannot be underestimated. So you know, they speak in between. They almost translate, or they almost communicate to both sides. They also intervene at some point, but speak, enter between, and that's really what they are. They're almost like a translator. They're in between. They're like a go-between, talking to both sides, and that's what that word is talking about. That is why high-level meetings between the U.S. and Turkey, whether on presidential or prime ministerial level, often resembled a tour d'horizon, tour of the horizon, right? A tower, actually, I think it was tour. From the Balkans to Central Asia, from the Caucasus to the Middle East. What's more, Turkey's democratic and human rights issues were always present on the agenda. And Turkey has often been not so good about it. Either one, actually. The years between 2004 and 2011 saw a peak in the intensity of bilateral talks as Turkey acquired the status of a mid-sized power, playing a constructive role in several regional issues and also having a say in global problems. And not only that, this was the high peak of Erdogan's reforms, democratic reforms, is where the average person was becoming more enfranchised, and that even the people who had been disenfranchised economically were being brought into the picture. There was a certain leveling. I shouldn't say leveling. There were people that were not accepted into the upper classes who were making their way there. Kind of a nouveau riche that was rising up among certain religious people, and that they were actually making some progress actually, and some of that was very good. Some of it ended up being very sinister, including the people that backed the Mavi Marmara. That's where a lot of that came from. But that 24 to 2011 was the high peak of all that. When I was living there, 2011, with the Arab Spring coming in, everything went to pot. And democracy was shed like the skin of a snake. Ankara enjoyed a golden age in its relations with the EU, while its mediation efforts between Afghanistan and Pakistan and between Israel and Syria meant that Turkey became seen as a kind of mecca of diplomacy. And this was during, at least when I was there, Ali Babajan had been the really foreign policy wizard. He was also a financial wizard. I mean, the guy's just an incredibly talented man. And if Erdogan falls, I would look to see him possibly step in. But Babajan was actually sitting down with Israel and Syria and talking peace. And that's what this is all about. They were just doing some incredible things behind the scenes, and nobody was talking about it over here. Nobody. Real shame. It should have been more important than what happened with the Arab Spring. The fact that in 2008 Turkey was elected to a record number of votes to be a non-permanent member in the UN Security Council for the 2009-2010 period was a clear sign of its diplomatic activism and popularity. And they were doing great things. They really were. It was amazing. There was an underbelly, with Erdogan and his pushing his Muslim or Islamist agenda, and the peculiar type of Islam and jihad that he has in mind. I think has been corrupting, but at the same time, for a time there, he was doing amazing things, really without even trying. And economically, they were doing wonderful. It was after that every time he opened his mouth that the economy would drop. I should have left then. Okay. However, things have now changed, and Turkey has returned to a micro agenda. In talks with Russia, for example, selling tomatoes has become one of the most important issues. My, how they have fallen. Just a few years ago, then U.S. President Barack Obama had said that then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan was one of his close friends among foreign leaders, with whom he had frequent telephone conversations. In 2012, Time magazine carried Erdogan on its cover. But things were changing. But before long, he had moved from the list of model leaders to the list of leaders with authoritarian tendencies, for good reason. He is now getting ready to talk with the new U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington, The composition of the delegation that went before him to prepare the talks is telling in terms of the agenda. Justice Minister Bekir Bozdağ, General Chief of Staff Hulusi Akar, National Intelligence Agency, that's the MIT, head Hakan Fidan, Presidential Advisor Ibrahim Kalin, and senior ministry official. Turkey's agenda for the talks is also telling in terms of how the country's foreign policy has downgraded itself to micro issues. And here are the three. Raqqa, which is the capital of ISIS's outpost in Syria, and supposedly the head or the capital of the state they are forming. The Fethullah Terror Organization, this is FETÖ, F-E-T-O. I don't remember the Turkish acronym, actually, what the words are in there. But Fethullah for Fethullah Gulen. And Reza Zarrab. And Reza Zarrab is I'll explain that in a second here. And that was dated May 16th of this year. So, three things were going to be the key in the discussions with Erdogan and President Trump. Now, Erdogan had a whole laundry list of things that he wanted to talk about. Number one on his laundry list was America not arming any Kurdish groups. That was number one. And he was very clearly shot down. And in fact, every account that I've seen written about this says that he was immediately told that that America was not going to be dissuaded in this decision. And he had no say in it. None at all. So, when we take a look at him and the submission that is clear on his demeanor, that he is the inferior in the two, he had basically what Trump did is he rubbed Erdogan's nose in his poop. That's what he did, just like a bad dog. And he was sitting there on television with poop on his nose. It's a way to look at it. That's really what happened. Now, and I'll give Obama some credit. He did call Erdogan to the carpet a couple times. And it was a similar situation then, too. And that's part of why he did what he did when his people did their thing last year at the Brookings Institute. That was part of why. It was a similar kind of thing. It was basically, well, if I'm going to get my nose rubbed in poop, I'm going to poop again. And that's really the kind of mentality you need to think about here. This guy is a dictator. He is used to basically subjugating people and making them do whatever he wants, and then laughing at them for being weak. So if somebody stronger comes along and pushes him around a little bit, what's he do? He takes it out on somebody weaker. He always does. And I'm sure he's taking it out on somebody back in Turkey too. I mean, there's probably somebody there that he's having tortured. I mean, right now, Sözcü, which is Turkish for writer, the magazine or the newspaper is being persecuted right now. They are a leftist publication, and it looks like their publisher and some of the key people there they've been raided, and they're being put in jail, and they're going to have all kinds of trumped up charges against them. Okay. The next article here that I have is by lovely lady named Nurai Merit. She is also a writer on international issues for Hurriyet Daily News. I like her a lot. And I'd marry a lady like that. And she's got guts. But she also knows when not to say things, and she's pretty wise that way. And this article is dated the 15th of May. Turkey painting itself into a corner in Syria. And this was also written just before and talking about the coming meetings. The U.S. decision to arm the Syrian Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG, has dealt a huge blow to the Turkish government's position. Worse, it came just before President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's visit to the United States. That's why he's trying to talk about it. Despite that, Erdogan is still harboring hopes of convincing President Donald Trump to reverse the decision. The opposition has suggested that Erdogan should have canceled the meeting with Trump. Both are utterly unrealistic responses to such serious crises. The Prime Minister, Binali Yildirim, sounded more realistic when he stated that Turkey cannot possibly declare war on the U.S. Mighty strong language there. Like a warning to Erdogan, I think. Nevertheless, his words only express desperation. Turkey can't declare war on the U.S. Keep that in mind, Tayyip. Don't mess up. Yildirim has been a doormat. This is the strongest thing he has ever said in public, which really kind of underscores how important it is to Erdogan that he watch his temper here. I think the major problem arises from the long-running refusal of Turkey's rulers to acknowledge the facts of the Middle Eastern situation. The fact that Turkey's insistence on playing a major military and political role in Syria and Iraq is not viewed favorably by its Western allies. At one time it was. In fact, really not that long ago. Besides, in fact, really that was Obama's plan. But he backed away from it when Russia got involved in Syria. That's why he didn't want to have any red lines being crossed. And I don't think that Assad was stupid enough to cross them. While I was over there, all the indications were that the investigation that came to the conclusion that Assad did it was a whitewash. And the investigation was done by the Turks. Well, imagine that. But there were other investigations that showed that actually al-Nusra was the one that performed the act. Again, perception is politics. The world does not perceive Assad as being as innocent of these kinds of things as he probably is. He's not that stupid. But by the same token, is he that ruthless? Oh yeah, he's that ruthless. But he's not that stupid. There's a difference. Would he if he could? Yeah, he probably would, but I don't think he did. And I think that what we have is a clear PR problem for Mr. Assad. That and in fact it's not going to change, because I think that in both cases that the Turks are behind both of those gas attacks, but they're not going to take the blame. Assad already has the blame. That's not going to change. It's not going to change. So, anyway, that's just the situation as it really is. The fact is that Turkey's insistence on playing a major military and political role in Syria and Iraq is not viewed favorably by its Western allies. Okay, and at one time it was. Besides, Turkey's wish for a role at the expense of the Kurds further complicates the problem. Now, that is a fact, and that's something that's going to be a bone of contention in a big way, and that's not going to change anywhere anytime soon. Turkey's and I can't address this enough. I mean, I really can't. Turkey's military operation in northern Syria was effectively limited by both the U.S. and Russia, and the whole affair was halted a while ago. Later, Turkey's air attacks on Syrian and Iraqi Kurdish militia positions were declared illegitimate. Despite Turkey's claims that the war on terror should include the fight against the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and the YPG, none of the international actors recognize the YPG as a terrorist organization. And again, the relationship is complex between those two organizations, but as near as I can tell, the YPG is separate and has made serious efforts to maintain its separacy. Moreover, the Western coalition has limited its fight with terrorism in the region to the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL or ISIS, right? As the PKK, and if you call them ISIS, what you're saying is Syria and Iraq and what do they call that? Shamash, the land of the sun. So, and that's the Levant. So there you have it. It depends on how you want to translate it. And the PKK has never been mentioned. Well, let me back up. Moreover, the Western coalition has limited its fight with terrorism in the region to the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL or ISIS, as the PKK has never been mentioned as a terror threat. Besides, even the PKK is not listed as a terror organization by the Russians. They don't recognize them as being a terrorist group. We do. The U.S. does, and so does Turkey. That's the PKK. Let alone the YPG. Okay, so the Russians don't see either one as being a terrorist group. We do not agree with Turkey on the YPG. Okay, so that's the situation. Even Turkey's best Arab friends, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, have refrained from clearly declaring their support for Turkey in its fight against the PKK and the YPG. There are some other things that are going on in that relationship I really don't have time to get into. But Yemen, the Turks offered to support Saudi Arabia in their fight with Yemen, and the Saudis were like, well, thanks, but no thanks. We don't really want you down here. Can you imagine? That would be a real interesting thing to see. And this has led to some bad feelings, particularly in Libya, and that the backing of basically of ISIS in Libya has split, and that the provisional government, which we've been backing, has its own areas, but they can't really control much outside of where they're standing. Whereas the ISIS splinters are actually fighting against each other, and Saudi Arabia is backing one side, and Turkey is backing the other. That's this complex relationship. There's no way to do it justice and still maintain a coherent story about it all. But I'll try to deal with that sometime in the future. Where are we? Oh. It is true that Turkey faced a fait accompli when the Syrian Kurds declared autonomy along Turkey's southern border. But the Democratic Union Party, the PYD, the political wing of the YPG, tried to reach some sort of agreement with Turkey at the beginning. And they're not wanting to talk to any political Kurdish group at all at this point. When Erdogan was trying to first assert his power, he turned to the Kurds, and he double-crossed them at a very early point. And that led to where he almost lost power altogether for a little while there in 2015. Actually, it was 2015, 2014. I guess it was 2014. And there was about a year there where they didn't have the majority. They weren't a majority party, but they were still kind of limping along as the government because nobody could form a coalition. A majority coalition. So they were the largest party in Turkey. They maintained about 40% of the vote. That's really their hardcore. And anything beyond that is usually some kind of a coalition, somebody that they courted and brought in. So 40% of the population is really Erdogan's actual support. That's what he's been ruling with. That's roughly 40%. So at any rate, this notwithstanding, the Turkish government refused to engage with the PYD on any level, especially after the Kurdish peace processes in Turkey came to a halt. It is not to say that Turkey would not have any problem with Kurdish autonomy in northern Syria, even if its Kurdish policy were more moderate, but Turkey would not have faced so many crises in the region in such case. Unfortunately, it would not be possible to suggest a revision of the Kurdish policy within the framework of the crisis in the Middle East, or within the framework of a democratic politics of home, without facing a nationalist uproar and backlash in Turkey. Worse than that, the main opposition Republican Party, the CHP, has long been held hostage to nationalism concerning the Kurdish issue in foreign policy. They're the Social Democrats, and they are also Kemalist. They're going back to Ataturk. They have their own problems, and one of them is that whenever the Kurds revert to nationalism, which they do very quickly, they tend to get nervous, and it just messes everything up. See, that's why the three parties couldn't get together. The Kurdish party and the MHP hate each other, and the MHP is very anti-Kurdish, and they are Turkish nationalists, and they will not talk to the Kurds. And the JHP, they might talk to them, but they're leery of them too. So you couldn't get the three of them to trust each other long enough to work it out. Most recently, a JHP MP, Öztürk Yılmaz, criticized the governing party and Erdogan for failing to stand up against the U.S. At the same time, the party is expected to warn the governing party to avoid putting Turkey in the position of North Korea by antagonizing the international community. Still, the opposition often tries to corner Erdogan and his party on the grounds that it is not being nationalist or anti-Western enough, rather than to suggest sober policy revisions concerning major issues like the Kurdish question and international and regional politics. Yildirim might have stated, "We are not in a position to declare a war on the U.S., but also means that we would be on the verge of conflagration if it were possible to challenge the world power. Our only hope is that Erdogan makes up with Trump by then." So I don't think that happened. We'll see how seriously he's going to take us backing a Kurdish faction in Syria. How it works out in the wash is really going to be hard to say, but keep an eye on him. Erdogan's ruthless, and he's potentially crazy at this point. And here's the last one here. This is by Sadat Ergin, and he's another writer at Hurriyet Daily News. This is dated yesterday, May 20th, and it's titled, "We Have a New Problem with Turkish-U.S. Ties." And so this is kind of the upshot, as near as we can tell at this point. As if there were not enough issues in Turkish-U.S. relations, a new one has been added to the mix. This new one is the unpleasant incident that occurred in front of the Turkish ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. on the day President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met U.S. President Donald Trump. Even though the Turkish delegation left Washington last week, the fact that the debate has continued for another 2 days in the U.S. is a sign that the reverberations of the incident, including the legal, juridical, and diplomatic developments it has caused, will occupy Turkish-U.S. relations for a long time. A short scan of the U.S. press the other day was enough to see how serious the dimensions of the matter have reached. While major newspapers such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal had extremely detailed stories covering the incident and harshly criticizing President Erdogan's security detail, the Washington Post also presented a very severe editorial. These stories contain the U.S. State Department's statement of violence is, quote, "violence is never an appropriate response to free speech," unquote, which also said that the U.S. communicated, quote, "our concern with the Turkish government in the strongest possible terms," end quote. News reports also said the Washington mayor strongly condemned these actions. On the other hand, the Turkish embassy in Washington issued a statement that groups affiliated with the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, aggressively provoked the Turkish Americans who responded in self-defense. And quite frankly, who cares? That is not acceptable. In another story in the Washington Post, the two law professors from Georgetown and George Washington Universities discussed whether the diplomatic immunity of the president's guards was still valid after they were violent in the protesters, thus opening the question of whether or not they would be prosecuted. They will not. Diplomatic immunity does extend to them. In the future, they might not be allowed in. Period. This is a very serious breach of protocol. And I'm not so worried that Trump didn't say anything here. I don't think that there's a whole lot that can be said that hasn't been said. And the State Department's pretty much speaking for him. So I don't have a problem with that. But this is not going to be permitted again. Or it definitely should not be permitted again. Erdogan really pushed his luck on this one. And as a matter of fact, I think he knows he did. And I think he did it deliberately. And I think he did it very calculatedly. And I think that also he is willing to put up with the consequences of it no matter what they are. We are talking about a huge ego here. And the man's a megalomaniac. He does believe that he's the Mahdi, the apocalyptic character from Islam, and that he believes that he's a man of destiny, and that President Trump is nobody compared to him. Because he's weaker, he's going to kiss his ass. But in the long run, the man is arrogant enough to really not care. He flouted, before it's all said and done, he flouted Obama. And it took a while for him to do it, but he did do it before it was over. Oh, where are we? In another interesting article was by Noah Feldman, a professor of constitutional and international law at Harvard University, on Bloomberg's website. He wrote that the attack fundamentally erodes the First Amendment value of peaceful protest right in the nation's capital. He also called on federal law enforcement to investigate. When all of them are added together, it is possible to say that these stories and articles have acquired a critical intensity. To be able to understand how deep the reactions of the U.S. goes, one has to see that as far as it is peaceful, the right to assemble and protest is one of the highest regarded and almost sacred value in American democracy. See, this guy gets it. He gets it. Erdogan doesn't. He has no clue on that. And when I posted this on Facebook, I mentioned that. I think that Abdullah Gül, even if he didn't get it, as far as a principle, would have at least understood the protocol. Whereas Erdogan doesn't have that in him. He doesn't have that in him. President Gül, when Gül was still president, he smoothed over a lot of things. And in fact, Obama was going to him instead of Erdogan towards the end. And it was because, Gül understands protocol at the very least. I didn't quite put it that way, but I did get that gist out of it on my Facebook post. And all the news stories and debates are associating the incident with the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment from 1791. This is the constitutional article that protects freedom of expression in its broadest form. It states that the state will not interfere in any form in the free exercise of religion and freedom of speech. The right to assembly is considered the basic factor of freedom of speech. And you think about it, it's key to all of those. The right of assembly. Actually, this amendment is the most important pillar that makes American democracy one of the most advanced democracies in the world. Within this framework, tolerance of the expression of even the most contradictory views is accepted as the most indispensable part of freedom of expression. Though through video recordings, the incident has become public knowledge in all of the U.S. The U.S. press has covered the incident widely. There are two dimensions to the matter. The first one is that the U.S. media, which has already had quite a critical approach to Erdogan, will not let go of the incident easily. We're not going to forget this time. But this is not a matter that only regards Erdogan. There is also the factor behind the sensitivity shown. This incident, in the light of the widespread concerns that after Trump's election, the democracy in the country has been losing ground, it is seen as like a cornerstone in terms of protection and testing of constitutional guarantees regarding freedom of speech. So, this is kind of a blowback with the mainstream media on Trump. So, this does become even more important because of that. This is perception, right? In this context, it can be assumed that public pressure will coalesce, demanding a thorough investigation. It will not be a surprise that liberal groups in the U.S. that are sensitive, particularly on fundamental rights and freedoms, will join the debate. Well, the liberals aren't that key on it right now. They don't care about free speech. It's the progressives and it's conservatives. And the libertarians. The Greens. The progressives, right? So, but there's a big concern here. And it will be there. And yeah, the liberals need to wake up and start getting back to the fact of backing freedom of speech in this country. Get your head in the right place, people. When viewed from all these aspects, we're talking about an issue that will grow further and become an annoyance in the coming days for Turkish-U.S. relations. So there's going to be a long-term reaction to all this. There's no question about it. And, the Democrats are going to have their own reasons, but the thing is that maybe, especially once this Russia bullshit kind of falls apart, that maybe some of them will come back to good sense. I know that some are, and thank God for that. At any rate, there were two things though that I didn't get back to, and I'm going to talk about them very quickly. And two other demands that Erdogan had in mind pertain to Fethullah Gülen. He was wanting Gülen extradited from the U.S. to Turkey. Gülen is a religious leader of Turkish origin. He's a Muslim cleric who has been pushing for interfaith dialogue. He is also a founding member of the AKP, the party that now rules in Turkey. However, the schism between him and Erdogan is fatal. I mean, the two of them are not going to make amends. Erdogan has made Gulen into the, what was his name, Goldstein or something in 1984. Well, he's the all-around figure of hate, the 3-minute hate character. And his organization is also being attacked as well. This complex of issues and stuff is something that I need to get into soon. I am researching a lot more on Gulen himself, how his organization played into the political situations, and managed to become a part of the founding of the AKP. And I do plan to present this in probably a short series of programs in the future. This is stuff that you're just not going to get in books, because it's really not there. I've been kind of compiling it from different things, but I've been doing my research, and I do plan to write some of this out, and I will let you know when I post it. The second thing that he wanted to negotiate, or actually second out of the three, because the third was the arming of the Kurds, and that was just not going to happen. Well, we're not giving up Gulen either. That's not happening either. This is where when Michael Flynn was given all that money by Turkey. I keep saying it's not Russia, people. It's Turkey. He was talking to people within the administration, telling them that we should give over Fethullah Gulen to Erdogan. And that's because Erdogan paid him a ton of money. Well, the third part of this is a fellow named Reza Zarrab. And Zarrab is an Iranian-Turkish businessman. He's a dual citizen of Turkey and Iran, and that he's Iranian extraction. He was the go-between between Erdogan and Ahmadinejad when he was ruling Iran. And the two of them were, with Ahmadinejad, were violating the embargo that we in the U.S. had over Iranian oil. And Erdogan was buying oil from them. And he was paying for it with gold. And Zarrab was actually using the gold to be laundered through the gold market, the international gold market. This caused a severe downturn in the gold market in December 2013. A lot of people lost their life savings in that over here. And not only that, Soros around that same time said that gold is the ultimate bubble. He's looking at that as being maybe a trigger for making a mint off of everybody in the end. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But the thing is that Zarrab was the one that did that. This led to Erdogan's son being caught on the phone calling his daddy and saying, "Daddy, what do I do with all the money in the shoeboxes? I have billions of dollars in shoeboxes. What do I do, Daddy?" This is on tape. And Fethullah Gulen's people caught it on tape and announced it. And that's when they started busting people in the AKP government for various corruption charges. Gulen had put a lot of his people in place in the police departments, in the prosecuting departments, and in the justice system. He was also putting them into the military. And this is about the time that Erdogan made a deal with the military that he was previously putting in prison as a bunch of enemies with the Ergenekon Balyo's investigations, which actually were a way of getting rid of his political enemies. And this was the point where the two of them and their split became permanent, and the rift just went from being periodic sniping to all-out war. So you see that these things are all connected. And now, what happened to Zarab is that after Ahmadinejad's government ended, and the new, I forget the guy's name, they just got reelected too, that when they changed governments, there were trials held in Iran, and several of Ahmadinejad's people were executed for various corrupt practices. They weren't being permitted by the mullahs. The mullahs were outraged. So Zarab thought it was best not to hang around Iran anymore, and there was a certain amount of stress going on in Turkey. So he decided to go on a vacation, and he ended up over here in the States trying to work up some dirty deals to make him and Erdogan some more bunches of shoeboxes of money. And he was arrested by Preet Bharat, the New York prosecutor, and that is now that Bharat has been taken off the case. There have been other people that have been brought in. One of the people that he's hired on his defense, and I'm not sure what kind of role he's playing, it really disappoints me to no end, has been Rudy Giuliani. And he's received millions and millions, not only from this Zarab, but also from Erdogan himself. And this was another thing that he was going to try to use. And now, I have the funny feeling that perhaps Rudy is taking money and running and laughing up his sleeve at all of them. But I don't know. I'm really not very happy with him for getting involved in this at that level. But that is the third leg of what he was trying to do while he was here. And so, at any rate, this is plenty long, and I need to finish it up. But until next time.